Good evening. Will the members and our guests please take their seats? This meeting will now come to order. As all members have received a copy of the call of tonight's meeting, the reading of the call will be omitted. Will everyone please rise and join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As all members have received a copy of the minutes of our December 8, 2008 meeting, the reading of the minutes will be omitted. Mr. Clark, you're not about to jump out of your seat, are you? Welcome back, Mr. Clark, from District 4 now. Yes. Are there any proposed changes to the minutes of our December 8 meeting? William Clark, District 4. And I assume you have been sworn in before you perform this responsibility.
It's a good day for being sworn in. Mr. Moderator, fellow members, just a very small correction about 3 or 4 paragraphs up from the bottom when the moderator announced that in order to comply with the budget constraints, each department would cut its budget. We should omit the apostrophe.
Thank you. Any further suggested changes to our minutes of the December 8 meeting? Hearing none and absent objection, the minutes as amended stand adopted upon unanimous consent. Michael Petrucelli, Chairman of our Budget Overview Committee.
Good evening. Mr. Moderator, fellow members and guests, the Budget Overview Committee asked the moderator for a few minutes just to give you an update on the budget and some thoughts our committee has around the process. Over the past several months, the BOC has met with the chairman of the BET, Steve Walko, the chairman of the BET Budget Committee, Michael Mason, the first selectman, Peter Tessie, to discuss the economy and its impact on the town budget. I want to brief you on these discussions, and I'm here to ask every RTM member to seriously consider the budgetary impact of every decision we make in light of the fiscal challenges currently facing the town of Greenwich. In addition, I strongly encourage every RTM member to work to understand the major components of this year's budget because we are going to need to make some tough decisions in May. Finally, we all need to work together now to identify areas where the town can improve operations and provide services more efficiently. Many of you may have read this in the newspaper. The town currently projects a $31 million shortfall over the next 2 budget cycles. This number is based on recent revenue trends, and that's decreased income from conveyance taxes, building permits, and interest, and originally estimated spending projections. That's the good part of it. If the town's obligation to fund pension costs increases as anticipated, this shortfall could approach $50 million over the next 2 years. The first selectmen and the BET are closely monitoring actual spending, which is coming in slightly below budget. This is a positive trend and should also help to reduce our shortfalls in the future. In view of the tough economic news and understanding that many of our own citizens are personally facing financial challenges, at our December meeting, we agreed to consider the impact of a zero increase spending budget for 2009-2010. Tim Harkness of the BOC worked with Roland Geiger and presented an analysis showing that as of January 6th, approximately $6.3 million in additional cuts to the operating budget would be needed to reach a zero increase budget. These cuts are in addition to the current preliminary budget, which already includes lower spending targets. While the budget is still being worked on as town revenue and expense numbers change on a daily basis, the analysis gives us an order of magnitude estimate to consider. We've asked departments for estimates of the impact on services if their budgets were kept flat. Every area of our town government needs to identify its true needs and priorities and must review its organizational structure with the aim of doing more with less. This is happening in the private sector as well as other municipalities in Connecticut and throughout the country. In addition, we need to consider the possibility that the town of Greenwich may have no choice but to implement layoffs. If the additional $6.3 million were to come entirely from employee reductions, town employment roles would need to be reduced by approximately 30 full-time employees. This number is in addition to the approximately 40 current vacant positions which are subject to a hiring freeze. In the 2008-2009 budget, the town's total full-time funded employment is approximately 2,400 employees. The Board of Education is responsible for the largest portion with about 1,400 positions, or 58% of the total. Some of the largest town departments include police with 184, Nathaniel Witherall with 156, Public Works with 136, and Parks and Recreation 111. In light of this analysis, it's critical that the town find ways to operate more efficiently. This may require flexibility from the employee unions to allow cross-training, job sharing, and possible outsourcing. These management enhancements can make a significant difference in facing our upcoming budget challenges. For example, some town departments have busy seasons, and we need the flexibility of being able to use employees from other departments to help out when necessary. This could result in reduced part-time employee costs, which could translate into minimizing or at least reducing full-time employee job cuts. We need the flexibility of outsourcing some functions that may not require special skills, but that can be performed by less expensive labor. It is imperative that we obtain that kind of flexibility in all future employment contracts. While the Selectmen and the BET have no direct control over the Board of Education's budget, which represents approximately $125 million in the current budget, or 40% of total operating costs, we believe that it is imperative that the education spending is managed with the same diligence as other town spending. The Board of Education, like every other part of our town, needs to evaluate itself from top to bottom to identify cost savings and efficiencies, and to maximize the effect of our limited education dollars to bring the most into each classroom. No one suggests that spending less is the best preferred outcome, but spending our education dollars smarter and more efficiently is. Most of the cost issues that we're facing are not new challenges. They have existed for years. We no longer have the luxury of putting off these important decisions. To that end, the members of the RTM have a responsibility to consider what levels are appropriate in the economic environment for the following: the operating budget, the capital budget, our spending on education, our borrowing levels, and increases to the mill rate. The BOC is asking every member of the RTM to consider these questions and to please pass your ideas on to our committee, the Board of Education, the BET, or to the Selectmen. Make your thoughts known to the first Selectman of the BET regarding the big picture. Should an increased budget be approved? Would a higher than 3.5% increase in the mill rate be acceptable? If so, under what circumstances? At the same time, remember that increased costs must be paid for by taxes or borrowings in a world of lower revenues. I'd like to emphasize that Peter Tessie was at our meeting last week, and Peter is the most open first selectman I think this town has had in a long time. He wants to hear what we have to say, and he does listen, and he will act upon our recommendations. Let's all do as much as we can now, and at our March meeting, the BOC hopes to present the mechanisms that we'll have available in May to influence the final outcome of the budget for 2009-2010. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Curtis, reporting on behalf of the Town Services Committee.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. At our December meeting, a request was made for the Town Services Committee to review legislation that we passed as a body in December of 2007. The legislation was very specific. It was looking to provide the public, the citizens, and obviously members of this body with more timely information concerning public meetings and notices and agendas. The two major components of that legislation have been researched, and I'm just giving a quick summary report. The first one is the posting of the actual paper notices, the public notices, outside of the town clerk's office. I met with Mr. Tessie and Mrs. Budkins concerning that, and a final decision hasn't been made, but they pretty much have a very good idea where that's going to be. That will allow anyone to view the public notices at any time the town hall is open. The case is locked and it is lit so that those notices will be maintained and kept safe. When a final decision is obviously made on that, the body will be notified, and obviously the citizens and general public. The second issue was electronic notification of public meetings and notices and agendas. As you know, right now, the town website, you do have to go hunt around to be able to find out what meetings are occurring on any given day. In speaking with the webmaster of the town website and looking into methods to provide that information in a more timely manner, she had several recommendations. We've reduced the options to 3, and now are just looking at what cost, if any, to the town there will be for those 3 options. Obviously, the final decision will have to be a decision made both by the Selectman's Office and by the Information Technology Department. It's hoped that this will be done in the next month, and my hope is that a report at our March meeting, which will be the next time the body meets, we should be able to have concrete answers for this. If decisions are made before that, obviously we'll make the body aware through notification via the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you. It is now at this time of the meeting that the moderator suggests an organization of our calendar for tonight. We have 11 items on the call. Item 3 has been withdrawn by our Legislative and Rules Committee, leaving 10 items to be disposed of tonight. I notified our district and committee chairs that I intended to place 5 items on our consent calendar based on the reports that I received from our districts and committees. Tonight, Mr. Brown, who is reporting on behalf of the Education Committee, informs me that one of those items is now a substitute resolution. So pursuant to our practice, that will not go on the consent calendar and will have to be taken up separately. I will take it out of order, as I'll explain later, leaving the following 4 items to be placed on the consent calendar by me. Items 2, 5, 6, and 9. That leaves to be, there are no combined items tonight. That leaves to be taken up separately. Items 1, assuming those 4 items are handled on the consent calendar. Items 1, 4, 7, 8, 10, and 11. And I would suggest we take up item 11 before item 10, which will be a discussion item. So at this point, pursuant to our rules, I will now place the following items on our consent calendar. And by rule, no item that remains on that calendar will be reported on by committees, nor will there be any discussion on those. So that first item, and all that will be heard tonight, is my description of the item. Item number 2 is the first item to go on that consent calendar. It is the appointment of Francis Scarpa to be a member of the Nathaniel Witherell Board for a term beginning April 1, 2009 and expiring March 31, 2012. Mr. Von Keyserling. Well, that may be, but we are appointing him tonight. So I do not distinguish and our resolution does not distinguish reappointments from new appointments. This is an appointment. The next item is item 5, which is the acceptance of a gift from the Mianus River Watershed Council, consisting of an underwater camera and related software valued at approximately $7,000. The third item is item 6, the acceptance of $2,000 from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation's Long Island Sound Futures Fund program, with those monies to become an appropriation upon approval of the BET. And the last of the consent calendar items, item number 9, which is the acceptance of a gift in the amount of $25,000 from RBS Greenwich Capital for the 2008 fireworks celebrations. Are there any objections to those 4 items being placed on our consent calendar? Hearing none and absent objection, will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Consent calendar items 2, 5, 6, and 9, and proceed to poll your delegation. That brings the first of our separate items before us. Item number 1, Al Cava, Director of Labor Relations.
Mr. Moderator, members town meeting, good evening. Item 1, resolved that the sum of $74,305 for the fiscal year 2008-09 be and the same is hereby appropriated to carry out the terms of the negotiated 4-year collective bargaining agreement between the town of Greenwich and AFSCME Council for Local 1303-222. Further resolved that the representative town meeting of the town of Greenwich hereby approves such provisions of the agreement, if any, which may be in conflict with any charter provisions, special act, ordinance, rule, or regulation of the town of Greenwich within the meaning of Connecticut General Statutes, Section 7-474. Thank you.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 1 has been moved and seconded. Joan Caldwell, Chairman of our Labor Contracts Committee.
Mr. Moderator, members of town meeting. The Labor Contracts Committee met last Monday night, January 12th, to take up 2 items. The first was item 1 on the call this evening, the proposed contract with AFSCME. The other was to discuss the general economic state in the country and our going forward with collective bargaining agreements in the next calendar year. Mr. Cava was present at our meeting. We had all members and delegates. We had a full house that night. Item 1 is a proposed contract settlement with AFSCME, representing 21 nurses, public health nurses. There are 3 who work in the town hall. They work a 12-month year, as all of our employees in town hall do. There are 18 school nurses who work a 10-month year, which is coincidental and identical to the school year. This contract is for 4 years. It commenced last July 1st, 2008, and it will terminate on June 30th, 2012. It provides for a general wage increase of 3.25%, 3.5%, 3.25%, and 3.5% in the years each year, respectively. In return for the general wage increase, the nurses agreed to give back or to the following concessions: to agree to increase the amount of co-pays for drugs, to increase the amount of health insurance premium that they pay. Now, those 2 happen to be very consistent with other health insurance programs, with other health insurance contracts that we have negotiated with different unions in the town. To eliminate life insurance for future retirees, to substitute for new hires the town's retirement health system savings program for a straight retiree medical credit, and to enroll all new hires in the town's defined contribution pension plan. That means that if accepted, the DC plan, as we call it, is now in every single union contract in the town hall, with the exception of the uniform personnel, fire and police. And there are some special issues which need further study, and we're not quite ready to address them. The impact on this is that right now, using a DC plan, we can calculate that our contributions for new hires will be at 5% a year versus roughly somewhere between 8.5% and 9.5% for those that are in the defined benefit plan. These contract changes, as I've said, are all in fringe benefits, and that's something that the town meeting has for at least the last 8 or 10 years said it wanted the town to focus attention on. Try and constrict the increase in fringe benefits, because we find that 10 or 15 years out, they're far more expensive than we thought they were the year we agreed to them. Our insurance costs, for example, though increasing, as everyone's insurance cost is increasing, it is not at the same rate. The increase in insurance is not driving our fixed expenses, as was the case about 10 years ago. The one item of this contract, and really the last item that needs to be addressed by the Labor Contracts Committee, is the half-hour lunch break that we are paying for now for the public health nurses. The school nurses have always worked without a lunch break. And try though they did, the Board of Education could never arrange for these nurses to get time off. It seems that whenever you give someone time to have a sandwich, that's when a kid falls off the jungle gym. And so the result was that they were working without the lunch break and without financial compensation. This is not the case anywhere else in town. It is not the case at Nathaniel Witherell. It was wrong. And the town knew it was wrong, and the town stepped in and agreed to make a change. And so we put $74,000 into this contract settlement in order to be sure that those nurses are properly paid for a lunch break. The cost of the contract without the lunch break is 2.45%, which is within the guideline that was set by the BET last spring. If you add the lunch break into it, the cost of the contract over 4 years increases to 3.56, which makes it above the guideline set by the BET. Notwithstanding that fact, because we felt that we owed it to the nurses to see that they had the compensation for that break, the Labor Contracts Committee voted 5 in favor to recommend approval. The committee believes that the GWI, although rich in this economic climate, is offset by the fringes that we will get from the changes in the insurance program, the health insurance program. Now, some of you may be wondering, and I think it's incumbent upon us to tell you, what will happen if this contract is rejected? By law, we go back to the bargaining table. But in point of fact, we've already done as much at the bargaining table as can be done, and we have an agreement before us tonight. So the committee believes that the nurses' union will say, look, we've given you our best thinking, let's go to arbitration. And they will undoubtedly, when they go to arbitration, file a wage and hour claim against the town for that lunch break that they have not had for many years. We will not win that, and we will in all probability be charged 2 additional years, retroactive, because that's what the law says, and quite probably a penalty. And we calculate, with Mr. Carver's assistance, that that'll probably run us about $147,000. If you divide the $147,000 by the 4 years of the contract, you will find that it's a 3% increase. So we won't have saved ourselves very much. The interesting thing and the alarming thing is that if we go to binding arbitration, or rather to arbitration, we put everything on the table. So not only do we run the risk of having to pay the $147,000 plus penalty, but in all probability, we'll likely lose something that's in the contract that we perhaps want. Remember that in the contract are those insurance changes that give us back some money and prevent new money from going out. There is also the membership or the enrollment in the defined contribution plan, which is a big savings to the town going forward over the next 10 and 20 and 30 years. So considering that it's a wash on the money, and we may lose an important fringe, why would we do it? Why would we turn it down? For that reason, the Contracts Committee really recommends that you approve this. Now, the other item that we took up, and because it affects all contracts, we believe that it should be put right in here. We know the general state of the economy just as you do, and we know that one of the things that drives the town's budget and the tax rate is the cost of employees. It represents somewhere between 70 and 80% of our operating expenses. Because of the situation and the need to reduce overall labor costs, the Labor Contracts Committee felt that it should consider some guidelines going forward. And these guidelines should apply to the town hall, to the Board of Education, and to the managerial personnel of the town. In other words, we're all in this together. We're lucky we have an awfully good Labor Contracts Committee, and I divorce myself from that statement. I consider myself the weak link in that chain. There are men on there that have negotiated, have had strong labor experience, and we sat at the table last Monday night, and they threw all sorts of ideas and suggestions out on the table for ways to reduce labor costs and argued them back and forth. It was a vigorous dialogue. It was really something I wish we could have had you present for, because it was good. And out of that dialogue came the following suggestions, which Mr. Kava heard and which I, the following morning, presented to Mr. Tessie. The Labor Contracts Committee believes that the First Selectman and the Board of Education should identify those positions under their jurisdiction which are essential to the health and safety of our residents or are mandated. We need to know the importance of each position in the town in a pecking order. That the general wage increases in future contracts be dramatically less. The word dramatically has been added by me only because I know no way to qualify it for you, but I know that in our discussions, 2.5% was considered high. That step increases be frozen. That flexibility of staffing be increased by the cross-training of personnel wherever possible. This is the same point that was just alluded to by Mr. Petrocelli of the cost of the budget overview. And that the health insurance plan of the town of Greenwich be revisited and revised to provide more basic and essential coverage and to eliminate those frills which are unnecessary. Thank you.
Thank you. Pam Frederick, Chairman of our Finance Committee.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator, members and guests. The item was as very detailed presented by Labor Contracts. Our vote was 11-0-1 in favor. District 2 abstained. I guess the only additional item was the concern with the length of the contract, that it's 4 years. A number of contracts we've seen have been 2 years, particularly given the built-in increases. But I think for all the reasons stated by Joan Caldwell, the committee voted in favor of this item. Thanks.
Thank you. Jerry Isaacson, Chairman of our Health and Human Services Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. We met with Al Cava, as did the other committees, and I think it's been covered so thoroughly that there's no need to. We covered most of the same points that have already been issued. The vote was 10-0-0. District 4 and 11 were absent.
Thank you. Discussion on item 1. Jim Boutel, District 8. To be followed by Paul Curtis, District 9.
Mr. Moderator, fellow members, I rise. I'm actually the Secretary of the Labor Contracts Committee, and I want to make one remark on our Chairman's report. She used the term, because we were specific in the committee, talking about controlling the cost of the GWI. We were specific in the committee about talking about controlling the total cost of contract. The GWI is only one portion of that. It's the very public, it's the general wage increase that every employee will see. That's only one factor driving our labor costs. Obviously, steps is another. when it comes to this bargaining unit that we're discussing. Almost all of the nurses are on the top step. So unlike other bargaining units, when you see 3, 3.5, 3.5, that is the true cost of contract when it comes to wages. There really aren't any steps involved in that. But I want to make clear, as we look at other units, that it's the total cost of contract. So when we talk about zero-based budgeting or controlling growth and spending, it's not just the general wage increase you need to talk about. It's all 5 items that Joan Caldwell mentioned.
Paul Curtis, District 9.
Just a quick point, Mr. Moderator, through you to Mr. McLaughlin or the town attorney. At our last meeting, we mentioned, I believe it was Mr. McLaughlin who mentioned that if we turn down the contract, that contract goes back to negotiation between the town and the bargaining unit. When that negotiation is over, does that come back to us prior to it going to arbitration?
Yes.
Okay, so if we turn any contract, I'm not speaking specifically about tonight. I just want to clarify that point because I believe Ms. Caldwell made it sound as if they could decide to take it directly to arbitration and we would not see it a second time.
No, that's not.
Okay.
That's not what I heard her say. But we're now all on the same page. So
Okay.
it does not. This came up at our last meeting, and Mr. Cobb, I think you verified that this would just go back to negotiation, and
They would bring their
an
next
agreement
best.
would come back to us for approval. Is that correct, Mr. Cava? Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Edwards, District 8.
Good evening, colleagues, guests. In the Health and Human Services Committee, we talked very thoroughly with Mr. Cava about this, and we asked the same question as is on everybody's mind: what happens if we don't approve this, considering the problems with the budgets and monetary policy affecting the town? The important point that was brought up by a nurse in the Health and Human Services Committee, which I think is really important for us to hear: if we reject this, we have a good possibility of losing nurses. Nurses are a commodity that are hard to hire because they're so desirable, they get pulled off into other arenas. So we would open ourselves up to potentially not being able to fill these positions if people left, and that we probably would have to pay a premium to try to get them back. The way I understood it is, according to law, we are required to have one nurse in each building, as I believe it was said. So I changed my thinking of trying to be extremely aggressive to maybe not consider passing this appropriation, but to consider very seriously that we do approve it.
Thank you. Is that Laura Erickson? District 5.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator, members of town meeting, and guests. I rise this evening to express my discomfort with the terms of the negotiated contract with this collective bargaining unit. It's not that I think that our town and school nurses shouldn't be able to eat their lunch. What concerns me is the combined impact of the proposed GWI increases alongside the additional compensation for the lunch period. The resulting 6.9, 4.6, 3.9, and 3.6% increases in years 1 through 4, respectively, are healthy even in normal times, and we are all acutely aware that right now things are far from normal. It strikes me as inconsistent that even as we are asking other collective bargaining units to consider layoffs and givebacks on GWIs, this item is before us as is. I understand these terms were negotiated in better times, but we have to decide this item based on the current economic outlook, and right now we are facing a very serious budget deficit. I question the kind of mixed message that we are potentially sending to other CBUs, the collective bargaining units, whose contracts are coming under review if we let this item sail through this body. Although the committee votes were strongly in favor, which presupposes that this item should pass, I would urge those who are also uncomfortable with this mixed message to vote against the item. Thank you.
Mr. Von Kaiserling, District 8.
Evening, Mr. Moderator. Happy New Year. Ladies and gentlemen, last meeting I got up and talked about the police contract as being baked, vote for it, pass it through. We have another contract. We're going into times, I see in the paper today, there's heavy discussion going on between our leadership, our selectman's office, and the unions as to how to address this peculiar and unique situation we have in our economy. And I think we have two separate situations we have to look at. We have the temporary crisis. We all hope it's temporary. If it's not temporary, we're going to be all at the funeral. So I'm assuming that this is going to be handled and we're going to live through this. The contract that you're approving today, hopefully, is a sound contract for all the reasons that have been given. There's many gains that we've gotten in it as a town in our normal management labor discussions, and coming to what is a mutually beneficial agreement. After all, contract negotiations are not who wins, who loses. It's you want to have an agreement between two parties that both people are happy with, or you're not going to have a successful outcome in it. You can't force good work. However, we're facing a very, very difficult time. We don't have the money available. We have a cash flow pinch. We don't have cash on hand. Many businesses are doing the same thing. They're not able to get the financing from banks and others. It's not that they don't have a healthy business, it's that they can't get the cash flow to handle their normal business, to get them through their normal business times. We're somewhat in the same boat. I think what the first selectman was talking about and was talking about in the paper today is very reasonable. Not that we cut all the contracts. We go on business as usual as far as the contracts go, because those are a long-term living organism that grow like our children do, as we do. We don't stop growing. However, there's no reason why the unions can't, in the process of this, forego the increases for a set amount of time during the crisis, so as to work together with the town to get through it and create a solid, healthy balance. So what I think is being discussed is not trying to squeeze contracts down to zero base, but to squeeze down our cost flow to a zero base to balance our income, our shrinking income. That, I think, we've heard from the unions certain indications of an agreeableness on it. We shouldn't take advantage of it. We should work with them in good faith. So I would pass this and think to looking towards the kind of cooperation that our first selectman has been working for. Thank you.
Further discussion on item 1. Is Mr. Fisher here? Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards item number 1 and proceed to poll your delegation? At this point, I had a request from our first selectman to address the body, so I will pause at this point in our agenda and recognize Peter Tessie, our first selectman.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator and ladies and gentlemen of the RTM. I want to begin by wishing all of you a very happy new year and certainly much energy as we address many of the challenges facing our community. I also would like to take a moment to, on behalf of the town and with you, wish our 44th President, Barack Obama, congratulations and best wishes on the occasion of his inauguration. We want to wish him success and good luck as he embarks on his presidency. You've heard from many of your leadership tonight who I have had an opportunity to speak with over the last several weeks, and it is evident that the communication that we have established has been very productive in giving a better understanding as to the challenges that the town is facing at this time. Last month, I talked to you about the steps taken to mitigate the impact of the town financial crisis on the existing year's budget. I spoke to you about the directive that was sent to town departments and the Board of Ed to contain costs in non-salary accounts in response to the declining income received from conveyance tax, building permits, fees, and interest on our cash balances. You've heard that this shortfall in the 08-09 budget is estimated to be $8 to $10 million. When we analyze our home sales, which drive conveyance tax receipts on a calendar year basis, the story is very clear. In 2006, sales were 1,132. In 07, 1,101. and in 2008 calendar year again, 687. The numbers in terms of receipts to date are not encouraging. The net impact to the decline in property tax revenues and the sales on property is a loss of several millions of dollars. The forecast for 9/10 on the projected revenue just from the items building permits, conveyance tax, and interest on cash balances is not favorable and factors into the limitations we have on our expenditures. Modest and predictable taxes are part of our residents' quality of life, balanced with their expectation for high-quality life safety services, excellence in education, quality public facilities, and recreational opportunities. However, job losses, reduction in pension and 401ks, and interest income is impacting our residents personally and will dictate now more than ever our need to constrain the growth in our town spending and keep mill rate increases in check. We will be making some difficult choices during this time of economic uncertainty. The budget is being baked, so to speak. It's getting ready to go to the BET Budget Committee very shortly. Monday evening, if you're all available, at 6 p.m., I will be presenting the consolidated town operating budget and townwide capital budget, along with the Board of Education presenting their operating budget. The town operating budget, along with the school's operating budget, is currently around 1% over the current year. This is inclusive of general wage increases and step increases. Many town departments are reflecting a decrease over their current year's budget. Overall, the projected operating dollar increase is $2.9 million over the current year. And we are continually finessing those numbers, but the realities are there is only so much you can squeeze out of a sponge before you have nothing. I mean, we're really working tirelessly over the last several days to refine the numbers. But again, it's important to note that the 1% increase, again, for the town and the schools is inclusive of GWI and step increases. In the area of fixed charges, we are projecting a $2.7 million increase over the current year. This is inclusive of a projected 8.2% increase in the defined benefit pension contribution and no increase to the OPEB fund. Again, no increase to OPEB. We also will need to absorb approximately $950,000 in parking-related expenditures in the general fund as the parking fund has been depleted. The recommended capital budget is $20,466,000 and represents a decrease of $18,360,000 or 47.3% from the current year, and a decrease of $67,628,000 or 76% from the 9/10 budget as shown in the 2008-9 capital plan. The significant reduction of capital spending is a response to the current economic crisis, which has resulted in large revenue losses. As part of a plan to maintain the town's moderate annual mill rate increase, the tax levy impact of capital has been reduced from a projected $37 million to $29 million. The $8 million reduction is just one part of a strategy to solve the projected two-year $31 million revenue shortfall. It should be understood the reduction to the 2009-10 capital budget does not just impact next year's budget and will force many capital projects to be deferred for several years. Maintaining the town's infrastructure is a top priority and is reflected in the type of projects recommended for funding in this year's capital requests. What is driving it? Completion of existing projects, continuation of maintenance programs, and ongoing planning for future renovations of existing facilities. With the exception of the $175,000 for the design of a King Street fire station, there are no other new initiatives. We are also hopeful to receive some funds from the federal stimulus package. Governor Rell requested all municipalities submit their requests to her by December 31st. We submitted a list totaling $85 million and look forward to working with our state and federal legislators to secure some funding for Greenwich. Our state legislators participated in my monthly department head meeting on January 3rd. And on And on December 24th, Congressman Jim Himes was present at a meeting in my office to discuss the goals and objectives of this stimulus program. The projects submitted must be deemed, quote, shovel-ready, unquote, which means they have to receive all necessary federal, state, and local regulatory approvals and must start within 180 days of the receipt of the funding. Targeted projects for consideration are energy-efficient buildings, modernizing roads, bridges, transit systems, and waterways. The objective is for this program to create jobs and stimulate our economy. Congressman Himes was clear to accentuate it is not an earmark grab, nor should it be larded with wish list items. I am currently putting together the final pieces of the recommended budget. The realities are we are approximately $5 million away from a total appropriation request that will keep us within the 3.5% mill rate increase. Therefore, we are forced to look at a reduction in the total number of positions in the town workforce. This option is one the BET has focused on for several years, and in fact, the town has made strides in reducing headcount year to year for the past several years. We currently have 6 fewer positions today than the start of the current fiscal year due to vacancies and reduction in headcount as we looked at the necessity for those positions. We currently estimate, and again, it's an estimate, up to 70 positions may need to be eliminated in order to realize the required savings in the 2009-10 budget. Last Friday, I met with the representatives of all the labor units and shared with them the challenges we face as a town. I listened to their suggestions and answered their questions. My expectation is we will thoroughly discuss through the BET RTM budget deliberations, workforce reductions, and other options. Some of the options for consideration are a wage freeze accompanied with a wage giveback. This will result in a one-time savings and not provide any long-term impact. A renegotiation of benefit provisions. It provides some ongoing savings, but not necessarily immediate budgetary impact. Consolidation of services, certainly under discussion between the town and the Board of Ed, but the budgetary savings may not be realized in the short term. And finally, one of the unions suggested an early retirement incentive plan. The upfront costs are high, and employees must be willing to participate. But clearly, we're going to develop a menu of options, but those options have to result in realizations of savings now. And they must have long-term benefit because this is not just a one-year problem, it is a multi-year problem. And so we have to look very carefully at the actions we take so that the intended consequences are what we truly desire. This year presents few easy choices as Greenwich addresses the impact of the economic crisis on our town budget and the ability to deliver service residents have come to expect within the context of the mill rate guideline established by the BET. This guideline is one of our town's hallmarks for the last 10 fiscal years. I am confident that working together, we will meet this challenge and work smarter and more efficiently due to it. There is much to consider as the budget develops, and your input into the choices presented is welcome. The RTM is the representative body of the citizens of Greenwich. Your voice and expression on these critical matters are important to me and the community at large. I will continue to advocate for a budget that is fiscally responsible and considers the dire economic circumstances facing the residents of Greenwich. And again, I just want to thank you and thank your leadership for working with me and listening. And together, I believe we'll meet the challenge that lies before us. Thank you.
Thank you. I have the results of the vote on the consent calendar items. Those were items 2, 5, 6, and 9, the appointment of Mr. Scarpa to Nathaniel Witherell, and the acceptance of gifts. Those in favor, 160, opposed 1, abstaining 0. The consent calendar items have carried. I also have the results of the vote on item 1, the public health nurse contract. Those in favor, 118, opposed 49, abstaining 3. That item is carried. That brings us to the next separate item, item number 4. Peter Crumbine, our selectman.
Resolved that the following named person nominated by the Board of Selectmen be appointed a member of the Board of Social Services for a term beginning April 1st, 2009 and ending March 31st, 2012. Rebecca Whalen.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 4 has been moved and seconded. Mr. Isaacson with the report of our Health and Human Services Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Our committee met with Rebecca, excuse me, Rebecca Whalen. She is the managing director of a consulting company and specifically deals with matters concerning organization and strategy. She's been active in Neighbor to Neighbor, has attended board meetings of social services, and she's concerned about the issue of gaps and overlaps involving social services and other town or private agencies. Our vote was 9-0-1, District 1 abstaining, District 4 and 11 absent. District 1 abstained because of a relationship with Ms. Whalen's company.
Thank you. Mr. Von Keyserling with the report of our Appointments Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, the Appointments Committee met with Ms. Whalen on the evening of the 6th last. We're extremely impressed with Ms. Whalen. We all have been following the long saga of the Social Services Department in the town of Greenwich and the attempts to get it tightened up and to be able to get a grip on its management and productivity. We find that Ms. Whalen is a particularly well-suited and positioned person to help in this. We're extremely impressed with her professional background that's been covered very ably by Mr. Isaacson, but we were particularly impressed by the wisdom she applied to the information that was given to her. She has already been doing research on social services. She also has background, as we've heard already, in United Way and Neighbor to Neighbor, so she has a familiarity with some of the areas. But what we were impressed with was her holistic look at the problems that they have to deal with in social services, not just the numerical, but the, how should we say this, the descriptive work. When you talk about a case study, it's not how many units are kicked out by a machine, but what do those units mean and what are their variables and how do you get a hand on the culture that's required to deal with these things. So we felt that she would be able to give the BET and our financial people the information they require in order to help us understand the budgets of the social services and be able to give the Board of Social Services and the department the kind of leadership and insight that they need to be able to communicate. Thank you. 12-0-0.
Thank you. Discussion on item 4. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, item number 4, and proceed to poll your delegation. Item number 7 now comes before us. Joe Siciliano, Director of Parks and Recreation.
Mr. Moderator, members of the town meeting, resolved that the sum of $175,000 be and the same is hereby appropriated to be added to the capital account number M824-59560-28084, known as the Griffith E. Harris Golf Course, Administration Building, and Pro Shop.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution? Resolution on item 7 has been moved and seconded. Pamela Frederick with the report of our Finance Committee.
Okay. Good evening. This item is an appropriation for $175,000 for the Griffith Harris renovation. The item was presented to the committee by Joe Siciliano. It's an interim appropriation to support an original appropriation of $1.56 million to construct the administrative and pro shops. The low bid of $1.34 million is approximately $200,000 over the budgeted estimate. This would leave or net the GRIF a contingency of only $150. The BET approval includes making $100,000 of this appropriation immediately available for the project, and $75,000 would be subject to the BET release. The GRIF is a self-funded entity, and funding of this appropriation would be from the existing $300,000 fund balance held in the GRIF revolving fund. This is derived from excess GRIF annual revenues over its expenses. It will take approximately 2 years to replace the funds into the revolving fund and by which they will be used for this appropriation. A separate maintenance reserve fund exists, and that's for $250,000, and that's held for usage solely by the GRIF as well. The committee voted 12-0-0 in favor.
Thank you. Karen Sadekhan, Chairman of our Parks and Recreation Committee.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator and RTM. I think it's been covered by the Finance Committee, all the information, so I won't repeat it. I will add that they expect to sign the contract February 15th. As you know, the current building is unusable with water leaks and mold problems. They're anxious not to have any delays in getting on with this project. The money for the project will be repaid to the general fund by the golfers' fees, as was mentioned, with the first payment being made on June 09. Our vote, I just want to say we had Joe Siciliano and Dave DeAndrea with us from the GRIF, and we went over everything quite carefully. And the vote was 10-0-0 with districts 1 and 2 absent.
Thank you. Discussion on item 7. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, item number 7, and proceed to poll your delegation? Item number 8 now comes before us. David Thompson, Deputy Commissioner, Public Works.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the RTM, Mr. Moderator. Resolved that the sum of $150,000 be and the same is hereby appropriated to be added to account number Z312 59620 28008, known as the Porchuck Road Bridge Replacement.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 8 has been moved and seconded. Pamela Frederick with the report of our Finance Committee.
Okay, good evening. This appropriation is for $150,000 for the Porchuck Road Bridge. The item was presented by David Thompson, who we would again like to congratulate on his promotion to Deputy Commissioner. This is an interim appropriation that augments the original budgeted project appropriation of $1.6 million, of which $128,000 was spent for the design, with $1.5 million remaining. This project has federal funding of 80% of cost and state funding of 10.6%, with the town funding the remaining portion of 9.4%. Based on a second bid, New England Road, who has successfully completed a number of other town projects, will be awarded the contract based upon its bid of $1.4 million. This bid was still much higher than the original budgeted amount, and based upon the current remaining budget, an interim request is needed to fully cover the construction administration contract, and that is a cost of $250,000. The state requires that the project be fully budgeted, including the administration contract, prior to awarding the construction contract. In addition to filling the gap on the administration contract, the DPW will request contingency funding for this project through the 2009-2010 town budget. That said, this is a bridge requiring repair with favorable state and federal funding, which leaves the town to only pay $14,000 for this interim $150,000 appropriation. It is also important to note that rather than seeking incremental town budget to fund this appropriation, the department will be using funds remaining from existing projects, many of which have been completed, that would have been returned to the general fund. So in essence, no incremental cost to the budget. The DPW works very closely with the state throughout the construction of the project. They submit monthly reimbursement requests and coordinate any changes with the state inspector on a regular basis in advance to ensure that they will be accepted and funded, thus mitigating any reimbursement risk. Our committee voted 12-0-0 in favor.
Thank you. David Millick, Chairman of our Public Works Committee.
Pamela, thank you. Very well reported. I did a little bit of math just to to take a little bit of a different angle from how Pamela had reported, because I think that was in effect what we had seen and discussed in the committee. The total appropriations for the project, I believe, total $1,719,000. $128,000 has been expended to date, leaving the $1,491,000 that was presented in the call, less than necessary $250,000 for the administration contract, leaving us with a balance of the $1.241 million. This gets to the net result, which was the rebidding scenario, where we had hoped to drive the cost down by approaching the marketplace again, and the marketplace had spoken, where we had the 3 bidders, which dwindled to 1, and that 1 bidder was slightly more expensive. We had a sidebar discussion on this issue, and it regards how we found that although last year we had a very large spike in material costs, unless those materials were actually bought in that point in time, those costs aren't buried in anybody's books. However, you have to make sure, though, that you recognize that costs have really just rebounded to where they were perhaps a year ago, maybe a little bit longer. Also, labor costs are fixed relative to contracts, and then insurance, overhead, financing, bond costs, et cetera, for these contractors are now under some pressure. So the reality is the market is telling us that things aren't really going to get cheaper. So I think we have to give kudos to the Public Works Department for actually attempting to rebid the situation. But if the scenario presents itself again, we just shouldn't have significant expectations. And if we do have a price spike, then unfortunately things may go in the other direction for future project bids. That aside, the benefit of this program is that it's funded 80% by the feds, the balance by the state to 90.59%, but we've got to fund it and get it done before we get the reimbursement. So in the end, we felt that this project, this bridge project, and we know what happens when we don't repair and maintain bridges in the state of Connecticut, is necessary, must move forward, and it also does impact future projects down the road. So it's necessary that we get this one out of the way so we can maintain our infrastructure in good standing going forward. Committee voted 12-0-0, all districts in attendance. Thank you.
Thank you. Vincent DeMarco, Chairman of our Transportation Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, fellow members. David Thompson, town engineer, also was with us on last Tuesday evening. Just about all the points have been made. I might want to add, though, beyond the numbers, that DPW had considered doing this bridge along with the Sherwood Avenue Bridge that needs repair, but felt that this one really should be done first. That would cause way too much traffic disruption. And also, he told us that numerous meetings were held with the surrounding neighbors, and they're satisfied with the project plan. There was one concern by a member of our committee that whether or not we're going to get these federal and state funds, considering the economic situation, and it was explained that the town enters into a binding contract for that, so there should be no issue. Our committee voted 11-0-0 with District 11 absent.
Thank you. Discussion on item 8. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, item number 8, and proceed to poll your delegation. I have the results of the vote on item number 4, which was the appointment of Rebecca Whalen to the Board of Social Services. Those in favor, 171, opposed 0, abstaining 1. That item is carried. We will now take item 11 up. Dr. Susan Wallerstein of the Greenwich Board of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Members of the RTM, the only reason for the substitute resolution is to identify the specific account to which this grant would hopefully be appropriated. Resolved that the Board of Education be authorized to accept a one-time energy assistance grant from the state of Connecticut, and the same is hereby appropriated to account A640-17895-2260.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the substitute resolution? Substitute resolution on item 11 has been moved and seconded. Josh Brown with the report of our Education Committee.
Mr. Moderator, fellow members and guests, the Education Committee met last Monday with 9 districts present voting. Districts 1, 2, and 4 were absent. This is a substitute resolution that we were expecting to identify the specific account, and that it was going to also be an appropriation. It is the acceptance of additional monies through a state grant program. It's allocated based on a $12 per student calculation. It's to help fulfill heating fuel costs. We had very little discussion on the item. It passed 9-0-0.
Pamela Frederick with the Finance Committee report.
This item was presented by Dr. Wallerstein. The grant is already approved by the state to fund increased heating costs faced by school systems. The entitlement was based on the number of students in each school district. Our vote with little discussion was 12-0-0 in favor. We voted on the original item without the substitute resolution account number.
Thank you. Discussion on item 11. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, item number 11? I have the results of the vote on item number 7, which is the appropriation for the administration building and pro shop at the golf course. Those in favor, 171, opposed 2, abstaining 0. That item is carried. That now brings us to the last of our separate items, item number 10. Do we have a resolution on that? Peter Tessie, our first selectman.
Mr. Moderator, resolve that the property tax relief for the elderly ordinance of the Town of Greenwich Charter and Code be amended as follows. Section 12-6.1, property tax relief for seniors. And it says, appears on the call.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 10 has been moved and seconded. May we have the reports of the committees that consider this? Pamela Frederick with the Finance Committee report.
Okay. This item is to amend the elderly tax relief ordinance. It was presented to the committee by Larry Simon of the BET and Ted Ordney, the tax assessor. Thanks for joining us. This is an existing ordinance, so I'll only report on the key changes. These include the raising of the maximum qualifying wage level from $39,000 currently to $60,000. This would be increased annually by the Regional Consumer Price Index for wages. The annual abatement would be limited to an amount determined by the BET, but no less than a floor that was set at $570,000. This amount is nearly the equivalent of the annual maximum that we have paid to date for this ordinance. The cap on this would be no more than 0.5%, and this would represent $1.35 million today. This is a decrease from the previous cap, which was set at 1%, and that would have been a cap of $2.7 million. The abatements will be awarded up to the BET-approved amount. These awards going first to the lowest income levels. Once the cap is reached, any higher income above that budgeted amount would not receive an abatement. Credits fall into 4 buckets: $500, $1,000, $1,300, and $1,900, with the lower incomes qualifying for the higher credits. When this ordinance was originally put in place, it included a sunset to ensure that it was working properly. This sunset has now been removed, and it's important to note that and to recognize that the town can still amend and or cancel an ordinance. It just would not go away automatically. The effect of not approving the change tonight would be to delay implementing the changes for this tax year. Given the economic environment, approving tonight provides the town the flexibility to either maintain or to expand the program to include more seniors who are in need. Our vote was 12-0-0 in favor.
Doug Wells, Chairman of our Legislative and Rules Committee.
Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, our committee took this item up on January 12th. We were assisted in our discussions by Assistant Town Attorney Jane McLaughlin, who provided our committee with a thorough summary of the changes to the item and provided us with the opinion that it was in legal order. We also were assisted by Leslie Tarkington of the BET, who served as one of the members of the Selectmen's Committee that was formed to take a fresh look at this ordinance and to make the revisions that are before you. The proponent of the resolution was Sam Deibler, Director of the Commission on Aging. Appearing with him was Jack Morris, a new member of that commission. The principal opponent of this resolution was our moderator, Tom Byrne. The explanatory comments and the previous speaker's comments provide a good summary of the substantive changes. I won't repeat them other than to say that not included in the explanatory comments was the fact that the sunset provision is being deleted so that this item would not come back to the RTM for further review unless it was deemed to be appropriate to be terminated at a later date or revised at a later date. Much of our discussion centered on whether or not this ordinance should remain as a tax abatement or whether there should be consideration given to converting this ordinance into a tax deferral program. Mr. Byrne, Mr. Didakis, and some members of our committee believe that given the current economic conditions and the likelihood of tax increases, the town would be better served by deferring the taxes rather than forgiving them. This would permit the town to recover the deferred taxes upon sale of the residence or conveyance to another family member. And those in favor of the deferral see that the ordinance as currently drafted provides tax relief ultimately for the benefit of the heirs of the seniors as well as to the seniors while they're living there. The arguments against deferral made by Mr. Deibler were as follows. One, a tax deferral system necessarily requires that the town place tax liens on the properties which could have a chilling effect on the willingness of seniors to make application for the benefits because of the perceived stigma associated with tax liens. Two, the time and cost of administering a deferral program would be greater because of the necessity to keep track of the amounts of the deferrals and the updating of the tax liens, as well as collection of the deferred tax payments upon conveyance of the real estate. The rejoinder to this argument in our committee was that it would be worth it for the town to take on these extra administrative costs because we would be recouping our tax revenues as a result. There was also concern at our committee that the proponents of these revisions did not offer sufficient information about who it is that is receiving the benefit and the value of the homes that are in the tax abatement program and whether these homes carry mortgages. Information that we were able to obtain at our meeting was that there were 570 applications made for tax relief last year. The average length of time seniors have lived in their current home subject to the abatement is 35 years, and the average age for the applicant is 83. Greenwich is the only town in Lower Fairfield County that does not have the option of a tax deferral program. Leslie Tarkington also pointed out that she was one of a minority of persons on the Selectmen's Committee that was in favor of a tax deferral program. Our committee also had some considerable discussion about the issue of legal order of the ordinance. Our concerns centered around the last sentence of paragraph 4, which describes the method by which persons otherwise eligible for a tax credit would be eliminated from receiving the credit in the event that the tax credit cap was fulfilled at the lower income levels. While some people in our committee believe the language would seem to indicate that those persons in the highest income bracket, those between $50,000 and $60,000, would be treated in the same way as the others in the bracket by receiving an amount less than the $500 credit for that bracket, Attorney McLaughlin, who had drafted the provision, explained that what it is intended to mean is that those persons in the higher end of the bracket would receive no benefit until such time as the town had worked its way through the list of persons in the bracket necessary to obtain the maximum amount indicated under the tax credit cap. In other words, rather than everybody in the top bracket receiving some percentage of $500, the people in the higher end of the bracket would receive nothing, while those in the lower end of the bracket would receive the full tax credit of $500. Some of us on the committee believed that the result was not clear from the language in the ordinance. We then took up 3 motions to revise the resolution. Those motions were to reinstate the sunset clause and to insert a date of 2013, to delete paragraph 11C in its entirety, which is the provision regarding the CPI wage increase, which would be designed to increase the income brackets over time,
and also to change the cap from the soft cap of 0.5% to a hard cap of not more than $1 million as a maximum tax credit available under this program. We then took two votes on the item as revised. The first vote was as to legal order. Our vote was 7-4-0. Those voting against legal order were from District 2, 4, 5, and 6, who were concerned about the unclear language at the end of paragraph 4 concerning the decrease to the credit for those persons otherwise eligible. And we took a vote on the merits. There the vote was 7-4-0 as revised. Those opposed were from Districts 1, 4, 6, and 7. The reason for the negative votes were that either that people believed there should be a tax deferral program or didn't believe the town was in a situation to extend tax relief under the current economic circumstances. And I'll make those changes at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Jerry Isaacson, Chairman of our Health and Human Services Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I think the facts have been covered very thoroughly and by the previous two speakers. We had Ed Krummick of the BET, Laurie Jackson, and Sam Dudler of the Commission on Aging at our meeting. The only one I would offer another comment about is the sunset clause. It was felt by those people informing us that there are other ways to deal with such a thing that can be affected by simple amendments. So the sunset clause is really not needed. But our vote was 10-0-0 with District 4 and 11 absent, and that's from the original proposal.
Thank you. All right. Before I call you back, Mr. Wells, let me report on the pending votes. The vote on item 8, which was the appropriation for the Port Chuck Road Bridge replacement, those in favor 173, opposed 0, abstaining 0. That item has carried. And item 11, which is the acceptance of a grant for the Board of Education, Energy Assistance Grant, those in favor 169, opposed 0, abstaining 0. That item has carried. All right. Mr. Wells, on behalf of the Legislative and Rules Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The first motion offered by Mr. Dudakis, which was seconded, was to reinstate the sunset clause, which was accomplished simply by removing the brackets around paragraph 18 and inserting the date 2013 where 2010 now exists. So it is as it reads there without the brackets and insertion of the date. Our vote on that motion was 11-0-0 with District 10 absent.
That being a motion offered on behalf of one of our committees, it does not require a second. So currently before us is the Legislative and Rules Committee motion to amend item 10 by reinserting a sunset clause with the sunset date of June 30, 2013. Discussion on that motion to amend. Mr. Wells.
Just give me a minute, Ms. Carlson. I won't take long. The thinking behind this from our committee was that it is a matter of some concern in our committee, and we think it's appropriate that the item be sunsetted so we can get more information on this some 4 years hence from now and take a fresh look at it at that time.
Further discussion on the motion to amend. Mr. Von Kaiserling, District 8.
Mr. Moderator, first, am I to understand there'll be a series of amendments from the legislative or just this one?
Three.
I don't imagine you want me to address each amendment each time, do you? You'd rather have me do it all at once?
No. We're discussing the sunset provision, and that is all right now.
Then, as General MacArthur said, I will return. Sunsets are necessary in this case. The main reason for this, we are creating a policy for the BET, our financial services, the assessor, and the administration to apply as a tool. We have had this on the books for several years. The basic policy is in place. It has been worked. We have a history and a track record that is showing, if anything, it's underutilized rather than danger of us running away with a huge expense. It is clear that under the way we work, that if at any point the BET or any of our bodies, the assessors or the first selectman, feel that there's a reason to amend or change this, and the case can be made, that can be brought back at any time. It doesn't have to be brought back in 3 years. The problem with bringing it back in 3 years, while I agreed with it in the first legislation because it was a new project, a test case that we were doing, it was proper to give it a trial run and see how it did and make sure that it came back to prove itself. It has, by and large, proved itself. Nobody here is arguing pretty much about it as far as the need for it or any of that nature in the application. We're fine-tuning it. In the meantime, as was said to us in the committee's discussions that I heard, we spent a considerable amount of special committee time and employee time, town expense to go through that process of preparing for a sunset, which may by and large be unnecessary when it is the BET basically who we are authorizing to handle this, and they review that every year anyhow as to how it's working and how to fine-tune it and how to apply it. I would think that the sunset is creating an unnecessary expense to the town, and it gives us a prevention for no real problem. Thank you.
Paul Curtis, District 9. Further discussion on the motion to amend item 10 by inserting a sunset provision. All right, I have a question for, excuse me? You want to speak on this amendment? Dr. Carlson, District 1.
Mr. Moderator, members of the RTM, I agree with the Legislative and Rules Committee on this, and I disagree with my colleague, Mr. Von Keisling. I think at this time, because of the economic situation we have, we need to be very careful on anything we do, and I think it's very appropriate that we who have the sovereignty for the people of this town do examine this from time to time. So I think this is a very appropriate thing that be reinserted. Thank you.
Further discussion on the sunset provision amendment. All right, I heard two statements during committee reports that I believe were not correct, and I'd just like our Assistant Town Attorney, Mr. McLaughlin, to perhaps come up and explain. And this is on the issue of the need for a sunset provision, and it was, I thought I heard a representation that because we are the legislative body that adopts ordinances, we can revisit this at any time, and therefore a sunset is not required. Now, while that is true with respect to regular ordinances, this has been adopted pursuant to state statute, which limits our review. So, Mr. McLaughlin, if you could just, is it correct that we would not have that ability on our own to revisit this and make amendments absent? Excuse me. State your point of order.
The chairman of the Legislative and Rules Committee identified you personally as the principal opponent of this item. Should you not yield the chair?
No, I'm not opposing anything. We're speaking on a sunset provision, and I want to clarify a statement of fact which I believe to have been incorrect. So the question is there a limitation on the RTM as a legislative body revisiting this without action from any other town body?
Yes, Mr. Moderator and members of the representative town meeting, there is a limitation. This particular ordinance gets before your body on the recommendation under statute of the town Board of Finance, which is the Board of Estimate and Taxation.
So if we were to adopt this without a sunset, it would require the Board of Estimate to bring something back to us before we could revisit it.
That is correct.
Thank you. Further discussion on the pending motion to amend by adding a sunset provision. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Did we have Randy Huffman, District 7?
On the Legislative and Rules Committee, I did vote in favor of this amendment. I think that in matters of this kind of fiscal policy, it is wise to revisit them, and so the presumption should be that it has a life that is to be reviewed on occasion, and I think we should be planning to review this to make it better from time to time, and therefore I would urge you to support this amendment and bring the sunset back into position. Thank you.
Further discussion on the pending motion to amend item 10. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Legislative and Rules motion to amend item 10, sunset provision, and proceed to poll your delegation. While we are voting, we will continue with the proposed amendments from the Legislative and Rules Committee. Mr. Wells.
The next item that was moved and seconded from Mr. Dudakis was to delete paragraph 11C in its entirety. 11C is at the top of page 14 of the call, and it is the provision which provides for an automatic adjustment of the income brackets based on the Consumer Price Index. That was deleted in its entirety. The upshot of this would be that the brackets would remain as they are. The income brackets would remain as they are. Our vote on that item was 11-0-0.
Thank you. That being offered on behalf of one of our committees, it does not require a second. Discussion on the motion to amend item 10 by deleting paragraph 11C. Mr. Boutel, District 8.
Mr. Moderator, fellow members, in our deliberations in District 8, we were joined by a member of the Commission on Aging and went through the history of this program down to the breakdown of where the applicants are, where the applicant properties are. And one of the things that was passed out was where the grants or where the tax relief has occurred in the various income brackets. And what was made very clear as part of that discussion was one of the reasons that this program has not been more successful, I will say that in parentheses, more taken advantage of by seniors, is that there has been bracket creep in the few short years that this program has existed. If you remove this index, you doom this program to what's made it not completely successful thus far. All I would say to you is April 15th isn't that far away, and think of the impact of not having the AMT indexed. Every year incomes go up, more people get hit by AMT. There's a reason to have it in here. If the prior motion by Legislative and Rules passes, yes, we will revisit this item. But if it doesn't, and we don't revisit this item on a basis of every other year and address income brackets, you're going to get seniors who get pushed out of the program. When incomes rebound and home prices rebound, the senior who's on the fixed income doesn't necessarily still have the money needed to pay the taxes on the increased value of the home. What's made this program, as I say, not as successful as it could have been, you've seen seniors move through the brackets, get a smaller bite at the apple. You know, $500 is less valuable to a senior, less worth their time to do the application than $1,500. Seniors who need this money, we need to index them to keep them somewhere in the same tax bracket.
Further discussion on the pending motion to amend. Mr. Wells.
My only response to the previous speaker is that the BET has provided for income creep by increasing the brackets from $39,000 up to $60,000. So that should all by itself make this more available to more people at the outset.
Mr. Simon of the BET.
Mr. Moderator, members of the RTM, thank you. The reason the BET left this provision in, which does have the effect of increasing the income brackets, is that, in part of what Mr. Boutel said, that if you take this out, people with the lowest incomes will creep up and they will get lower benefits. And leaving this in will enable the people who have the lowest incomes to get the most money, which was at least one of our objectives of this ordinance. And since the BET controls in Section 4 the amount of money that goes into this, this wouldn't affect the total cost of the program, and this is why it was left in. And if you put a cap and the BET has and there's a floor in the ordinance, and the BET will choose a number between that, this section here, which I was in favor of leaving in, doesn't increase the cost of the program and ensures that the people with the lowest level of income do in fact get the highest level of benefit. And if you think that is important, which I do, I would urge that you leave it in. If you don't think it's important, then you can just delete it, and then the money will be spread into increasingly higher income brackets. Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion to amend? Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Legislative and Rules motion to amend item 10, annual income percentage increase provision. Mr. Boutel, what is your point of information?
Just so we can stay clarified on the votes, on the prior item, which would be the sunset, a vote in favor of the motion
Is to insert a sunset provision into the ordinance. As it was proposed to us, there is no sunset. So this was a motion to amend by putting a sunset provision into the ordinance. Voting yes is in favor of doing that. Voting no is opposed to having a sunset. This last vote that I just called for, if you are in favor of leaving the indexing of qualifying income in the ordinance, you should vote against this. If you want to leave that index in there, if you want to take it out, that is what the proposed amendment is. You should vote in favor of the amendment. All right. This second motion, if you want to take out the indexing of qualifying income to the regional wage increase, then if you want to take it out so that there is no such indexing, you should vote in favor of the motion to amend. If you want to leave that index in there, you should vote against the motion to amend. So why don't we hold the meeting in abeyance until we have the results of those two votes? It's too late for me to answer that question. May we see the chairman of District 2, please?
How are you going to vote the last item? This is...
Did you cross it out? Just cross it out and initial it, please. While we are waiting for these two pending votes to be tabulated, I want to remind our members that as of the present, we are planning not to have our April meeting. And I alerted district and committee chairs that one item that will come before us in March will be our review of the plan of conservation and development. And that will require a special effort on our part, because that draft will not be released until Friday of this week. There will be a hearing held by the Planning and Zoning Commission on February 3rd. It's a public hearing, after which they will formally adopt the Plan of Conservation and Development. So there is a tight schedule within which to work, and all of our committees need to be aware of that and begin scheduling their meetings so that we can get the benefit of the advice of our committees when we take this up in March. All right, we have the results of the vote on the pending motions to amend item 10. The motion to amend by adding a sunset provision to 2013, those in favor 150, opposed 19, abstaining 2. That item has carried. The motion to amend by deleting the provision regarding income level increases tied to the CPI wages for the region. Those in favor, 34. Opposed 133. Abstaining 3. That motion to amend has failed. Mr. Wells.
The last amendment proposed by Mr. Dudakis and seconded was on paragraph 4, which is on page 10 of the call. Go to about a third of the way down. The paragraph that begins, or I should say the line that begins, 2, the amount of tax credits for approved applications, and B, not greater than an amount, and it goes on for the rest of the sentence. The motion is to delete all the rest of the sentence from an amount based on an estimate in any tax year and insert in its place $1 million. So it'll paragraph 2B will read the amount of the tax credits for approved applications, and B, not greater than $1 million. Upshot of this will be that it'll reduce it from a soft cap of 1/2 of 1% of the total tax revenues derived from real estate to a hard cap of $1 million.
Okay, that being offered on behalf of one of our committees, it does not require a second. Does everyone understand it? So that is currently before us. Does everyone understand what this motion to amend seeks to do? Is that a yes? All right. We are looking at paragraph 4 of this ordinance, which is titled Limit on Abatement. Currently, and there is a minimum and a maximum amount of credit provided for in paragraph 4. This amendment seeks to change the maximum amount of credit, to limit how much can be given as credit in any given year. Currently, what is before us proposes that the limit be 1/2 of 1% of the total real property tax levied in the town in the current tax year. That's not a number that can be determined until all revenues from property tax are known. This proposal would change that formula to limit it to $1 million each year. So specifically, the change is to, in paragraph 4, you should see in the 6th line, in bold, the words "not greater than," followed by unbolded words that begin "an amount," and continue, the rest of that sentence then continues to the end. This proposal, after the bolded words "not greater than," deletes the rest of that sentence and inserts in its place $1 million. So it would read, "and be not greater than $1 million." All right, discussion on that proposed amendment. Mr. Von Keyserling.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I try to keep my promises. I don't quite understand what's going on. We're talking about an infinitesimal, tiny little speck on a fly on an elephant of finance in this town. We have this fear, this paralysis that runs through the people worried about anything that might get out of their control. We're going to die. We're going to drown. The sky's falling. It's like Chicken Little. What this is saying is it says we're giving a floating cap on this program, and we give the BET the discretion of how much of that cap they apply. They have the full discretion. They don't have to give the full cap. They can give up to that amount. Are we saying that you don't trust the BET by putting this in? We're going to put a firm cap in there because these people are such runaway artists that just throw money around. We know that they're spendthrifts. They're just sloppy. They don't know what they're doing. We can't trust them. Why should we leave that to them? Let's put a firm $1 million cap on it. This is a difficult time, ladies and gentlemen. This is when you have to put trust in the people who you know what they're doing and give them the latitude and the flexibility to deal with the problem artfully. You don't sit there with a hammer and beat on their head and say, we don't trust you, you don't know what we're doing. We here, sitting here, know exactly down to the penny what's going to happen in 1 year, 2 year, 3 year. We're going to do this because we're just scared and we don't know what to do. That's not being responsible. That's not being statesman-like. That's putting your head in the sands. Leave it to the people who know what they're doing. Thank you.
Mary Ferry, District 5.
I believe there's a big misunderstanding about what this cap is doing. It does not take away the ability of the BET to adjust the limit within the 570,000 up to 1 million. All it does is it sets a firm cap on the upper limit of what they can appropriate.
Further discussion on the legislative and rules motion to amend. Mr. Boutel, District 8.
Fellow members, I thank you for supporting keeping the indexing in. And if you're going to keep the indexing in, to a degree, you've got to index the benefit as well. I mean, otherwise, we're going to see the reverse of what I told you before. We're going to chew up everything available, and the only people that are going to be eligible for this are the people in the lowest parts of the bracket. Then we run into the issue of what we talked about before, the people in the top bracket going through the difficulty of chopping them down one at a time. I agree with Mr. von Keyserling's comments about trusting the BET, though President Reagan used to say trust but verify. You put the sunsetting back in, so you now have that ability to verify. I would urge you not to accept this amendment if for no other reason. The committee that worked on this, and I was not part of it, spent hundreds of man-hours. There were reportedly 3 town employees involved, numerous volunteers. The person who was in our district is a professional who's normally billing hourly billing rates in excess of $600 an hour, gave numerous hours of volunteer time. Rather than the hour and a half maybe we've spent on this in the town meeting, an hour that maybe got spent on it in committee. This got thoroughly vetted by that committee, went through the Board of Selectmen, went through the BET. The ordinance works as it is now. And if it doesn't, guess what? You put the sunset back in, it'll be back to us again.
Further discussion on the pending motion to amend item 10. Yes. There was a number of, the question was, what would 1.5% of the taxes this year total, correct? That was your question? What would the amount be if this provision was in effect this year? Is it 1.3 million? 1.35. Mr. Simon, why don't you get up and respond?
The ordinance says to take 0.5% of the taxes levied in this current year, not the taxes collected. And I think we sent out tax bills of $271 million, so half of that is about $1.355 million.
Further discussion on the motion to amend. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Legislative and Rules Committee motion to amend number 3, item 10, and proceed to poll your delegation. If you are in favor of inserting a hard $1 million cap, you should vote yes. If you want to leave it as 0.5% of the total property tax levied, you should vote no. And we ultimately will need the result of this vote before taking a vote on the merits. But while we are voting, if anyone cares to address item 10 as amended so far, you are welcome to do that. Is there any speaker interested in addressing item 10? Then we will await the result of the pending vote before proceeding further. Mr. Laurie, could you make up your mind, please?
Okay.
We have the result of the vote on the third motion to amend offered by our Legislative and Rules Committee. Those in favor, 50. Opposed, 114. Abstaining, 3. That motion to amend has failed. So we now have before us a proposed ordinance for senior tax credit relief that has been amended by inserting a sunset provision. Further discussion on item 10 as currently amended. Mr. Petroselli, District 12.
Good evening. Mr. Moderator, fellow members and guests, my name is Michael Petroselli. I'm a delegate from District 12. I'm also a member of the North Miami Sewer Oversight Committee. To be clear, I am not here on behalf of the Budget Overview Committee. In fact, we didn't even take the item up. So again, I am not here on behalf of the Budget Overview Committee. Some of you may have seen the Greenwich Times yesterday, the headline about North Miami Sewer Project, and what we believe is a conflict with another section of the town charter. I'm going to briefly discuss it. I'm going to ask for a bit of latitude to discuss how we got here, but I'll be concise. Although I believe...
Well, excuse me, Mr. Petroselli, someone is raising a point of order. Who has a point of order? Please rise. Mr. Tuthill? No, we are having further discussion on item 10 as amended. I did not call for a vote. I'm calling for further discussion. I've not heard what he said, so I don't know if it's germane or not. Mr. Petroselli.
Thank you. Although I believe that the property tax relief ordinance for the elderly, I'm not here to discuss its merits. I am here to discuss a potential conflict I see in this section of the town charter, that's 12.6, with another section, 259C, as it relates to the sewer assessment appeals. If we're going to take the time to revise the charter, which if you note by looking at the charter happens regularly over the years, we need to do it correctly and diligently. I reached out to some key individuals 2 weeks ago expressing my concerns about the issue, and I either received no response or what I considered a dismissive response. So please understand this is not a last-minute attempt to stand in the way of this ordinance, which I actually think is a good ordinance. My concern in call item 10, subsection 7 regarding delinquent taxes is this. Now here's delinquent taxes. I'm going to read it to you. No tax relief shall be given under this section to any person who has delinquent taxes to the town from real property, personal property, or motor vehicles, including capital assessments or user charges owed to the town which have not been paid in full or brought current by June 1st preceding the fiscal year for which tax relief shall be granted. For purposes of this section, abated taxes shall not be considered delinquent. This makes sense to me. If people are not paying their taxes, they should not be receiving abatement. My concern, though, is based on the town's interpretation of Section 259C, that senior citizens who might otherwise qualify for tax relief may be denied that tax relief. On January 23rd of last year in this room, there was a public hearing about the North Mianus Sewer Project. That project affects 790 property owners in North Mianus. Anyone who attended that meeting in this room knows it was energetic. At that meeting, the North Mianus Sewer Oversight Committee presented a 40-page document outlining our concerns and the conflicts we saw with the apportionment as it relates to the town charter. I won't go through each item, but I want to just briefly discuss some of the town charter conflicts. And related to trunk sewers, which we think amounts to roughly $2.5 million of excess charges.
Mr. Petroselli, I will rule that discussion of the details of the sewer assessment issue is not germane. We can simply understand what your point is. You have filed an appeal challenging sewer assessments, and some of that group have refused to pay those assessments. That's the issue. We don't need to know. We're not going to judge the merits of your appeal. What you want to do now is, in essence, carve out an exception for those who have refused to pay that assessment and say they are not delinquent under this ordinance. Is that correct?
That's not correct. But let me jump ahead.
Well, we're not going to get into the merits of a sewer assessment
No, we're
appeal.
not.
Okay, so
No, we're not.
then get to whatever your point is.
Section 259C of the town charter, as it relates to sewer assessment, says, and this is the conflict I believe that exists with item 7, such appeal, during the pendency thereof, shall stay further proceedings for the collection of the particular assessment upon which the appeal is predicated. Again, such appeal, during the pendency thereof, shall stay further proceedings for the collection of the particular assessment upon which the appeal is predicated. It is our belief and our attorney's belief that it's pretty clear. The town cannot take on further proceedings to collect this assessment. If you can't take on further proceedings to collect the assessment, the question is, how can you be delinquent? The town has a different interpretation. If you're part of our sewer appeal and didn't pay your assessment, you received a letter from the town. One line says, the pendency of any lawsuit or appeal does not affect the obligation to pay assessments. It also says, an interest at the rate of 1.5% for each month, or 18% annually, shall be charged from the first day of April until the same shall be paid. I want to read 259C again. Such appeal, during the pendency thereof, shall stay further proceedings for the collection of the particular assessment upon which the appeal is predicated. I'd argue that denying a senior tax relief they're otherwise qualified for is further proceedings. I would argue that qualifying someone as delinquent when 259C is in question is furthering proceedings. It's all the more troublesome that when on this Friday, January 23rd, 1 year to the day that the hearing occurred in this room, Judge Tierney in Stamford is taking up this case. There's two appeals. The first is
Mr. Petroselli, at this point, I must ask you to tell us what you want us to do.
On Friday,
what would you like this body to do? Do you want us to vote against this? Do you want us to amend it? We need to know what you would like us to do.
I'm getting there. Just one more moment, please.
Mr. Petroselli, please.
All right. I'm making a motion that we postpone this issue till the March meeting. March call and March meeting. That will allow Judge Tierney to take up the case on Friday, where we specifically asked him to rule on Section 259C. I don't think it's fair that seniors in North Mianus who've appealed this case and what we believe under 259C have the right not to pay this until the appeal is heard to be denied their tax relief. I think we'd be affirming potential litigation that's going to be heard in 3 days. We can wait till March to take this up. Judge Tierney is going to rule on this. I think we'd be irresponsible to take this up now. We were led to this point because we had conflicts in the charter and we didn't have open communication. We need to review this, review it thoroughly, and have a communication, and let the process work its way out. So I'm moving to postpone this issue to the March call and the March meeting.
It has been moved and seconded to postpone item 10 to our March meeting. Discussion on that motion to postpone. Dr. Carlson, District 1.
Mr. Moderator, fellow members of the RTM, I had thought on coming in here tonight that I would make a motion just like the one that was just made, but for a very different reason. We have great problems in this country today. I think it is not clear how matters are going to resolve this year in terms of the economic crisis that we're now in. It could be that matters are much clearer and perhaps better by March, and we would have clarification how things might go. There has been some remarks made in the Legislative and Rules Committees about deferral instead of forgiveness of taxes. In an extreme case, it might come about that deferral might be the better route. I'm sympathetic to the old people, especially. My district is heavily populated with older people. But the middle-class people who have houses may be in just as bad trouble as some of the older people. I think we're in a particularly confused period right now. And if we have a little bit of perspective, say about 60 days, it might be of the greatest help. And so I'd ask you to put this off for 60 days. I don't think anyone would be hurt by it.
Well, first of all, it wouldn't be 60 days, but March 9th is our March meeting. Further discussion on the motion to postpone item 10 to our March meeting. Mr. Von Kaiserling?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, to the town's attorney. Could the town's attorney comment on the interpretation that these elderly would be considered delinquent taxpayers as opposed to a suspension? It goes to the point that the gentleman raised as the reason for the amendment. I wanted to understand.
Well, the question is, would the seniors who have withheld their sewer assessment be considered delinquent?
On what basis are they considered delinquent? How do they interpret that?
Mr. McLaughlin, are you able to respond to that? Gene McLaughlin, Assistant Town Attorney.
Mr. Moderator, members of the representative town meeting, if the elderly did not pay their sewer assessment, they would in fact be delinquent under this ordinance. The ordinance states in paragraph 7 that the tax relief is not given to any person who is delinquent, and part of the definition of delinquent includes capital assessments. So the answer to the question is that yes, if the elderly or seniors were not current on their assessments, they would be considered delinquent and therefore not be able to take advantage of this ordinance.
Thank you. Peter Scher, District 12.
Mr. Moderator, could I follow on that question?
No.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I am also from District 12, and I'm going to rise tonight and support Mr. Petroselli's motion. I think we have an obligation here in the RTM. I call this the law of unintended consequences. I think we have one part of the charter that was amended back, I believe it's in 1962, which is 259C within the section of the charter that deals with sewers. We now have this section of the ordinance before us that we'll see tonight. And I think, despite everyone's best efforts, it's pretty clear that these two items are potentially in conflict when we go to practical application. And I think everybody in this body does the best job we can do, but we can't foresee every consequence that's likely to come from our actions. But now we have a situation that's right in front of us where it's very clear what happens when we put these two parts of the charter together. And how should we address this? I think we should actually pause because, as Mr. McLaughlin said earlier, there will be no opportunity under this section for this ordinance for the RTM to correct this if this is not what we intended and we vote for it as it is tonight. I think taking a pause and a postponement for 60 days, probably letting legislative and rules look at this. I think it's problematic when we have residents, particularly people who I represent, who have legitimately tried to get redress from their government. They followed the procedure. They now are in Superior Court. I don't think any of them are doing this to avoid taxes, which is probably what we intend for people who are legitimately not paying their taxes. But this is a situation where people are trying to do the right thing. And now we're going to take away from them another benefit, particularly people who make $60,000 or less, which isn't a lot of money in southwestern Connecticut. I'm not sure that that's what the RTM, this body, actually intended. I think we should look at it for another 60 days. It doesn't have any practical impact, and as we reauthorize this, we should be certain we know what we intend and what we're doing.
Further discussion on the motion to postpone. Mark Pruner, District 10. To be followed by Paul Curtis, be followed by Doug Wells.
I certainly have some sympathy with the people who might be deemed delinquent. The problem is, if you look at the resolution here, it says resolve that the property tax relief for the elderly ordinance section 12-61 of the Town of Greenwich Charter and Code be amended as follows. If we do what they're proposing, the ordinance that's causing the problem will continue in place. And that happens whether we postpone this or not. I would recommend that we go ahead and vote on this issue tonight. We certainly have gone through a lot of time and trouble to amend it. It's not going to affect their issue one way or the other. Whether we postpone it or not, this ordinance that's causing them the problem continues to infect. So let's vote on it, get it out of the way. If they want to bring a motion for us to consider at the March meeting, I think that would be the better way to do it. Thank you.
Mr. Curtis?
I just want to add to Mr. Pruner's comments is keep in mind that we're voting on the ordinance, as Mr. Petroselli and Mr. Sheriff said, that the discussion that they're having and the litigation that they're involved in has no concern with this ordinance. It has to do with a charter and portions of our charter. We're not voting on that. As Mr. Pruner said, this is a tax ordinance. Their argument is not with the tax ordinance. Their argument is with the charter. So I agree with Mr. Pruner that I recommend that we adopt this now as it has been amended. And as Mr. Pruner said, it's already on the books. So they're delinquent. The citizens mentioned here are already delinquent under the ordinances that already exist. Thank you.
All right. No, I'm going to Mr. Wells. Okay. Pardon me? All right, well, listen, I need to address that point that Mr. Pruner raised because it relates back to the point that I wanted everyone to be clear about earlier. And that is what I asked Mr. McLaughlin to clarify earlier. And I'll ask Mr. McLaughlin whether this is a correct statement. If we approve this ordinance tonight, because of that state authorization that only gives us the ability to address this property tax credit for seniors when it is brought to us by the BET, if we were to adopt it tonight, we could not on our own go back and take it up unless the BET brings it back to us. Mr. McLaughlin, is that an accurate statement?
That is correct.
All right, Mr. McLaughlin states that is correct. Further discussion on the motion to postpone? Yes, Mr. Gortney, our town assessor.
There are just 2 points I'd like to make the members aware of. First of all, there is a statute that provides for this as an option, a local option. There are deadlines in that. We have to issue the notices by the 1st of February, which is like next week. And they have a limited time to apply for this. So this would then go against the state authorizing statute. Second, and more important, we did look at the issue of who is delinquent. There are 40 taxpayers that are senior members. that are qualified for the senior exemption. All 40 of them have paid their taxes on time.
Further discussion on Mr. Petroselli's motion to postpone. Larry Simon of the BET.
The last point I would make on this is if you do not pass this ordinance, we will go back to where we are today, which has the $2.8 million cap. It entitles everyone who qualifies to be part of the program under the old brackets, income brackets and benefits, and it takes away from, at least from my point of view, from the BET, any flexibility of controlling the cost of this program within the budget that we're now faced, which is more challenging than ever. I think if the issue gets resolved in the courts as to who's delinquent or not when we apply the credits in June, that issue can be resolved then. If it still remains as an open issue, we can take that up at a later time. So I urge you to pass this amendment, this ordinance as amended. Thank you.
All right. I will, since this is a procedural issue, I will, in the first instance, call for a voice vote. So if you are in favor of putting off item 10 until our March meeting, you should vote in favor. If you are opposed and want to vote on it tonight, you should vote no. All those in favor of Mr. Petroselli's motion to postpone item 10 to our March meeting, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? No. That motion to postpone has failed. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Item 10 as amended. All right. Whoa. I'm going to pull that back. Pull that back. Janet Lockton, for what purpose do you rise? No, we are not. This is adopting an ordinance. All right. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Item number 10 as amended and proceed to poll your delegation. We will need to await the result of that vote before adjourning the meeting. We have the result of the vote on item 10 as amended. This is the tax credit for seniors. Those in favor, 153, opposed 4, abstaining 3. That item is carried. There being no further business to come before the meeting and absent objection, this meeting stands adjourned upon unanimous consent. Thank you all for coming. Have a safe trip home.